It's a California legend. Some young actor or young actress takes a bus to the Golden State, and then they get discovered by some mega producer or famous director. And suddenly they're cast in tons of films, and they have more wealth and fame than they ever could have imagined before. And we look at someone who lived that story, and we say to ourselves, that's a good life. But is it? Is it a good life? Because a number of celebrities have actually gone on record in a very candid way by saying, like, they're kind of miserable even with all their wealth and their fame. Jesus once said that if you want to find your life, you have to lose it. What did he mean by that? The first Christians understood that their happiness and a life of fulfillment wasn't tied to wealth and to fame, rather to understanding there are separate lessons you have to learn at different stages of life in order to give your life away. So let's explore what those lessons are, and let's discover what it actually looks like to live a good life.
Good morning. Welcome to vervecity.church. My name is Josh Crane. I'm the lead pastor here. Glad that you are here. We're in week 3 of this series called The Good Life, and I want to really quickly recap the first 2 weeks of this, because if this is your first week joining us, it'll be helpful for you to have a little context as we head into our message today. If you weren't here the last couple of weeks, I want to encourage you maybe sometime this week to jump onto our YouTube channel or onto our website, vervecity.church, just to refresh and to see what it is that led us to the point that we are at today. We started in week 1 by simply saying this, that a good life starts with Jesus. So we're not talking about life hacks. We're not talking about like 22 things to have the best 2024 you can have. It's not that kind of thing. What we're talking about is simply the question, like, what does it look like to get to the end of your life and to look back across it and say, like, that was a life well lived? Or more importantly, for those who know you and love you the best, your friends, your family, perhaps your coworkers, to realize that your absence means a bit of a hole in their heart after you're gone. Because all of us have been to a memorial service, a funeral, where someone was gone and people were obviously very sad that they weren't here anymore. And all of us have been to a memorial service or a funeral where somebody was gone, and afterwards we're going to eat a casserole and go home, but there will not be a hole there because this person did not live a good life. What does it look like to do this? And so a part of what we just talked about is that a good life starts with Jesus. We believe he is the way, the truth, and the life. And so if you want your life to be optimized, as good as it can be, it needs to start with Jesus. We also talked about the fact then that life is kind of broken down into 2 halves for people who experience both. Not everybody does, by the way. You can get older and not become an elder, but for people who are able to like really conquer both halves of life, to climb the 2 mountains, sometimes the way we refer to it, the first half of life mountain, the second half of life mountain, these mountains have differences to them. The first mountain says that you establish an identity, and you leave your parents, and you cultivate your talents, and you build a secure ego, and you make your mark, right? That's kind of like all the order that you're handed at the beginning of life. But at some point, you'll get blown off the mountain, and you'll be in the valley, and maybe it's some kind of horrible tragedy that happened, or maybe you got to the top of the mountain, and you realize, like, man, I conquered it all, and I am still not very happy. For whatever reason, you may get blown off that first mountain, and in the valley, you may decide to climb, instead of reclimbing the first mountain over and over, to climb a second one. And that second mountain looks like checking your ego, and it becomes less materialistic and more others-oriented. It clashes with culture because it doesn't have the same values that Western culture has, and it becomes almost unoffendable. You're not offended because your identity and what you believe, it's safe and secure. You're not looking to always be offended by other people. And this is just a completely less anxiety-filled way of living. I just want to attest. It's not that I, of course, have completely made it here, but I can just say life's very different than it was 10 or 15 years ago for me. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people that get to, their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond, and they're still just offended by almost everything. And so if you start to climb this second mountain, you may end up going to lunch with a friend. Maybe you've been friends for years, but you're climbing the second mountain. They're still on that first one. And so they're telling you about how angry they are that, their neighbor had the different politician sign in his yard than they had in theirs, And so you're like, look, I get that you guys see the world politically differently, but maybe it's not the best thing for you to, plot their murder over noodles this afternoon. Like you're having a big reaction, it seems like, to this. Well, what is that about? See, from the second mountain, that doesn't seem right because you're almost unoffendable. From the first mountain, you can get set off because other people's beliefs that are different than your own feel like a threat to you. So this is some of the difference. So the way that you move then from the first mountain to the second mountain is is the same pattern for everybody. As we look through the scriptures, we see the pattern over and over and over. And it's simply this: order, disorder, and reorder. Order, you're handed a way of understanding the world when you're a kid by some adults, some mentors, some teachers, some parents in your life. And then at some point, you start to question everything you were handed. You get knocked off that first mountain, you start to question. We talked a lot about disorder last week. And then after that, you move to reorder. Like order, disorder, I'm questioning everything, to reorder. What does life look like now that I've walked through order and disorder? Last week when we talked about disorder, we just talked about a few things. That first of all, the way down is the way up. That at some point, tragedy will strike. At some point, a crisis will hit you. At some point, you will have suffering be a part of your life. And it's actually only through that, when your current paradigm no longer works for you, that you'll be willing to reconsider it and to possibly move on to something different. Which means that the way down, right, when you're in the valley, the way down is the way up. You have to go that way, I'm afraid. I said last week, we were delivered more through our suffering than from our suffering. Like we end up, like our life ends up getting, God can really work in our suffering in order to change us and to shape us and to shift us. But he doesn't deliver us from the suffering, but through it. And then finally, that Jesus is not a shield against suffering, but a pathway through it. He's not a shield against it, but a pathway through it. Now, something I didn't have time to get to last week was what it's like to be stuck in disorder. And so anywhere along these pathway, the order, disorder, reorder, you can get stuck. And so some people get stuck in order. In fact, in the U.S., we find that we have two political parties, right? One's more conservative, one's more progressive. Most Western countries have more than two political parties, but we just have the two. And so it kind of leads us, I think, more so than other Western countries, to have like kind of an either-or mentality about so many things in life. And so it's like, well, you're either this or you're that. But each of these parties have a major weakness, and it's the flip side of the same coin. So the conservative party in the United States, the weakness it has is it tries to spend almost all of its energy on protecting order, right? Those things that you were handed early on in life, like that's the order. And like instead of actually experiencing doubt or frustration with that or reconsidering it or moving forward, it just protects the order that it always has. That's what it means kind of to have a conservative mindset in the U.S. today. Protect the order, protect the order, protect the order. And therefore, if someone starts to question that order or has doubts about some of the lessons that order teaches, they're seen as someone who is a betrayer, or they're not a patriot, or they don't love their country as much, or they're evil or wicked. Like, so we're protecting the order, and therefore anyone who would question the order that we're protecting is seen as a potential threat to that order, and then they must be cast out or dealt with or excoriated in front of the crowds. So that's kind of like the shadow side of the conservative political party in the U.S. There's a same shadow side, the flip side of the same coin. There's a shadow side to the more progressive party as well, more liberal party here in the United States also. And it is stuck, whereas conservatives are stuck in order, progressives are stuck in disorder, the questioning of everything, the cynicism, the constantly pushing the boundaries, the belief that institutions are inherently corrupt, that can never do anything. It's just disorder, cynicism, taking apart, deconstruction, and they just get stuck there. And so there are these challenges with getting stuck in disorder, and I just want to talk through a little bit of what those are, because some of you made it through order in life, and then you started having questions, and you push back on the order that you were handed. Good. Everybody needs to do that. Before you can believe something, you have to first question it. So if you're in disorder, if that's an area you've been into, great. But I just want to encourage you not to stay there, right? Because you can't build anything interesting when you're stuck in disorder. All you can do is tear stuff down. And some stuff needs to be torn down. But if that's all you're capable of doing, you will not be helpful to yourself, and you will not be helpful to others. I have a friend of mine who grew up in Alabama. And he said they have a saying in Alabama that's about donkeys, but they call them asses there because that's, I don't know, it's a thing. All right, so they say in Alabama, the saying is, any old ass can knock down a barn. It takes a really special ass to build one. Was that helpful? No? What the saying means is, right, any old donkey can knock down a barn, right? Just back into it, ee-aw, ee-aw. Was that a helpful visual, right? You just knock it down. But it takes a really special donkey to build a barn back, right? They don't have opposable thumbs. You have to be really special if you're going to build that barn back. So here's the thing. Bottom line for you today. I want you to be able to be a really special ass. Was that helpful? I don't know. Okay, so I want you to be able to rebuild, not just deconstruct, not just tear down, not just take apart. You need to be able to do that. You will do that at some point in your life. Almost all of you will do that. But if you get stuck in disorder, you actually won't be able to help yourself or those around you very much. So I want to talk about a few ways that we get stuck in disorder. First of all, we start to doubt structure, right? Institutions, for instance. And look, if you doubt institutions and structure, I don't blame you. We've had a lot of evidence to show that institutions are worthy of our doubt. So, for instance, let's go back to the 1960s. We're not going to take this year by year, okay? I'm just going to give a brief overview. Just a few things that happened over the last 60 years, though, right? And we had the civil rights movement, which brought about much better equality for people in the United States. It was a good movement. Like the results of that movement, there was a lot of great that came out of that. But it was disorder, right? You're upending the current order in the U.S., and therefore, some people don't like that. And they freak out about that. And now we have to try to find a new normal, a new equilibrium. And so there were institutions that didn't do well with that. And there were some institutions that really fought hard against that. And so they kind of, people look at those institutions like, what are we doing here? They seem untrustworthy. And then we had the assassination of several political and civic leaders. People like John F. Kennedy and people like Martin Luther King Jr. And then we had, the Watergate scandal. And we had scandals around Vietnam. And there was just a lot to point to. It's like, man, are all the institutions just corrupt? Is everybody just in it for themselves, right? So it's not just doubting structure, but it's doubting authority, the individuals. Like stuff comes out and we're constantly trying to ask, like, wow, were they just trying to make a quick buck, get their bag and leave, and like everybody else is left holding the bill? Is that how it works? And so the problem is when all you can do is be cynical about structures and authorities, when you're in disorder, you can't actually solve any of the problems that start to matter the most to you. I'll give you an example. In 2008, there was a movement that started in New York City called Occupy Wall Street. Some of you remember that very well. Some of you were not born then. But in 2008, we had a financial collapse in this country, and there were a number of young people especially who went and occupied Wall Street. They set up camps overnight. They did chants. They did rallies. And what they were essentially pointing to were problems in our structure in the U.S. and in the West generally that most people agree are problems. Major income disparity between the wealthiest and the poor. A financial system and a political system that's set up to protect some of the biggest companies in society while not offering much protection for those who are the poorest amongst us. And so they had numbers of points that they wanted to make society better. Like, this doesn't seem fair. It seems like we care more about this than this, and we don't need to totally not care about this and only care about that, but just a little bit more fairness would be helpful. Now, at the time, it's all these young people meeting. Ben and Jerry of Ben and Jerry's Ice Cream came to this group of people at Occupy Wall Street, and they said, look, we think that a lot of the problems you've identified in society, we agree with. We think that that's real. But if you want to actually make change in this society, you're going to have to organize. You're going to have to choose some leaders from among you. You're probably going to have to run for political office. You're going to need to build a party platform saying specifically, what would you like to change in order to make our society a more fair society? And we know that that's going to take time and energy and money, so we'd like to give you $1 million so you can do that. And Occupy Wall Street group, they told Ben and Jerry to go pound sand. Because they said, look, we don't trust any leaders, so we're all equal here. There's no one amongst us that's going to raise above the other. We don't want to put a structure in place. This is a grassroots, and this started from the ground, and we're going to do it like this. And that's why, by the way, their resistance to structure and authority is why that movement took over the entire world, and here, all these years later, everything's much more fair and equitable. No, that didn't happen. It totally disappeared within a few months. Why? Because the cynicism they had about structure and authority meant that even though they had some great points, they could not become the change they wanted to see, because actual systemic change takes structure and leadership. It takes those things. And if you get stuck in disorder, whatever cause, you look around, you see some unfairness or injustice in the world, whatever cause pulls on your heartstrings, you will not be able to make much of an impact probably in that area unless you figure out some way to say, look, maybe no structure, no authority is perfect, but maybe some is better than none. All right, but sometimes we get stuck in disorder. Third one, doubting our purpose. Right, for lots of people, when you get to disorder, you start to doubt any kind of purpose statement. Any organization that has goals, it starts to smack to you of conquering the world or colonialism or some version of that. And so you're just like, man, because a lot of times the older you get, the more aware you become of the fact that some things that have been a benefit to you have hurt other people. Your faith tradition, your religious tradition probably wasn't good for everybody all the time. Your country, whether it's the U.S. or wherever else, probably what was good for that country or that nation was bad for some other countries or nations that maybe paid a price for that. Like, it's just, you start to understand, wow, the world's a more complicated place. And so you start to become suspicious of any goal, of any cause, of anyone that wants to go and try and change the world. And so you start to doubt that purpose is even real. And so that you can just be stuck in disorder because you're afraid if you were to even set a purpose or a goal that you might necessarily hurt some other people in order to try to obtain it. And then finally, you start to doubt belonging. You start to doubt belonging. Like, do I really belong? And if you can't find, right, if you have trouble with every structure, every authority, and every purpose, it's very hard to belong to anything. You know, you don't want to be a part of a church because you're really suspicious that church can be helpful. You don't want to be part of a political party because you're really suspicious that political party can be helpful. You don't want to be a part of a country, a nation, a country club, whatever it is. You want to be a part of these things because all you can do is see kind of the negative of them. And look, if you're looking for negative in human organizations, you will find plenty of it. I learned this years ago. It was really helpful for me. Every organization creaks and groans a little bit. It just does. And so you either say, well, then it's all terrible, or you say, like, look, we can still good things can still happen even through imperfect people and through imperfect organizations. And thank God for that because we have nothing else but those. So you can start to doubt you belong to anything, and you start to think like, well, it's just me. You start to feel lonely, like I'm out here. I'm the only one who's like, spitting truth bombs. It's just me by myself. Or you find another group of cynical, disgruntled people, and you occasionally have lunch together and talk about how stupid everybody else is in the world. Those are kind of your options. And look, it's always fun to get together with people and talk about how much smarter you are than everybody else. But at some point, you start to realize this is a dead end. Like, as brilliant as we are, us just sitting around and pointing out all the problems with the world doesn't solve a single one of them. So I don't want you to get stuck in disorder, even though I think disorder is helpful. I want you to go toward reorder on the other side of that. And I wish I could give you like 2 or 3 simple steps to move toward reorder, but unfortunately, it's far more complicated than that. So here's what I'm going to do today. First of all, we're going to look at a teaching of Jesus. It's the same one we've looked at the last couple of weeks because there's so much depth to this. I just want to keep kind of plumbing it, okay? Then we're going to talk about what it looks like kind of from a belief perspective to move toward reorder. How do your attitudes and your perceptions of the world shift? Next week then, it's kind of going to be reorder part 2. We're going to talk about what does it look like then with this shifting in your belief and in outlook. What does it look like to really impact the world and give your life away and change other people's lives? Like, we'll look very pragmatically next week. Here's actual things you can do, questions you can answer, things you can implement right away. Next week's very pragmatic. This week is a bit cerebral because we're talking about belief. And because I can't tell you, do these 3 things and you'll move to reorder, I have to kind of help you understand the shape of it more than the steps it takes to get there. And for some of you who are in disorder right now, this will be really helpful. For some of you that have already started climbing that second mountain, you've already started the reorder process. I think today will be really helpful. For some of you who are just like stuck in the defending order stage, I don't know how helpful this will be. I hope it will be helpful. Even if you can't quite imagine what it would look like for you, hopefully you can see kind of what it might look like at some point. I just want you to see the shape of things. So we're going to start in Matthew chapter 16, verse 24, and Jesus says this to his disciples. If any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way, take up your cross, take up your suffering, and follow me. All right, it's order, disorder, reorder. You have your own way. That's your order, whatever you were handed. You have to give that up. Like whatever way you were handed, it's not the way. So you have to be willing to give up your own order. And then you have to take up your cross, your suffering, your valley moment where you get tossed off that first mountain. Take it up, and what do you do with it? Rage against the machine? Yell into the void? Cry into the night? Follow me. Reorder your life around me. Reorder your life around my way. That's the invitation of Jesus. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it, right? Some of us try to hang on, like the order gets threatened because someone questions it or doubts it, especially if we're running the institution or we're running the order. Someone else has questions about it, and immediately it feels like an attack on us or on our sacred beliefs. And so we just like, we're just going to buckle down and just like defend it, protect it. You can't, right? You just try to defend the order. It's like the tighter you hold on to that, the more it starts to slip through your fingers. And it even for other people, for you and for other people. But if you give up your life for my sake, if you turn from your way for my sake, you will save it. And then he says this, what good will it be for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? In other words, You can climb the first mountain, stand at the top, get all the acclaim and the fame and the money. You can have it all. But if you never discover your soul, or if you lose it in the process, you have nothing. Or you can plunge into the valley of disorder. And man, you can point out every problem with every organization. You can spot a hypocrite from 200 yards away. You can be the best at pointing out all the problems in society. But if you forfeit your soul, it doesn't matter. You've gained nothing. So I want to talk then a little bit about how things come together. We talked last week about how things fall apart, right? How you end up in disorder. I want to talk a little bit about how things come together. These are things that have to happen as you pick up your suffering, your cross, you follow Jesus, and you move into reorder. These are things that happen. If you're not able to do some of these things, like you will not be able to climb the second mountain. You'll just keep climbing that first mountain over and over and over again. Here's a few things. Number one, you need to have an openness to new things. One of the things that helps with this is if your old paradigm gets shattered, you realize it doesn't work anymore, you start to believe that maybe somebody else has something to teach me or something I could learn. Like you start to be open to other possibilities, and that is good. That is good. Number two, you become increasingly humble. You know, when you're young, you kind of assume that the older you'll get, there are like right and wrong answers to everything, and the older you get, the more wisdom you'll get, and therefore the more mature you'll get, and the more mature you are, the more certain you'll be, because you'll know the right answer for everything. It was very upsetting for me when I was about 19 years old and I had this professor named Dr. Bob Utley. I loved Dr. Bob because he was in his 60s when I met him. He was of East Texas, so he spoke with a Texas twang. He was very brilliant, a biblical scholar. This guy has written commentaries on every book of the Bible, every verse of the Bible, and has published them in PDF format online so that pastors all over the world who can't afford Bible commentaries can download these. I mean, this guy loves people, loves Jesus. I was so inspired by him. And we loved him because he was just irreverent enough as a Bible teacher at a Baptist college for students to find him really compelling, but not so irreverent that the school lost donors, right? It's a very helpful middle tension you got to sit in right there. And so we loved him because he would say things like this. We were studying the book of Revelation. Some of you have heard me say this before. It's one of my favorite things he ever said. And the book of Revelation in the Bible is highly metaphorical, uses lots of figures of speech. And he was trying to say that to us because the danger is that you try to understand it all literally, and that's not helpful. He says, folks, if you're going to try to read Revelation literally, you're going to run into a lot of problems here. You know, it talks about the whore of Babylon that sits on 7 hills. Folks, if that's literal, that's one big whore. Holy spit. That's the kind of stuff he would say, right? And so you'd be like, wow, that's amazing. Like, I love this guy. He's one of my favorite humans. And then I remember this thing that he has it all figured out. He is so knowledgeable, so brilliant. And then I remember one time, the first semester I had him, he said this: the older I get, the more I realize I don't know. He went on to say, the more I learn, the more I realize I haven't learned. Like, this felt defeating as a 19-year-old because my understanding was that the more mature you got, the more certain you got about how right you were. What I learned from Dr. Bob is that the more mature you are, the less certain you are. Now, if you're still trying to climb that first mountain and you believe that order is the answer for everything, you are not comfortable probably with mystery and uncertainty. And just someone talking about it may make you feel like, whoa, do they believe the right things then? Or it can feel uncomfortable. But if you're in disorder, or if you're moving toward that second mountain of reorder, then you know that there's a lot of freedom to be found in this. Here's the great thing. 2 things. First of all, and this will come as a shock to some of you, you don't know everything. Your family knows you don't know everything, but some of you may not know that you don't know everything. Secondly, you never will know everything. And you don't have to. And it's like a relief. Oh, some things are just mysterious. Oh, some things I think and think and think. You realize the older you get, sometimes you start to unknow things you thought you knew. Like some things seem so clear and so, oh, it's so obvious. And you get older, you're like, oh, that's a little fuzzier than I thought it was. Oh, that's not as clear as I thought it was. Because the more mature you are, the less certain you are. So if you're going to move toward reorder, there's an openness to new things that needs to happen. There's an increasing humility that needs to happen, right? Like, the more I know, the more I realize I don't know. The older I get, the more I realize I haven't learned. The older I get, the more I realize probably all the things I'll never know. It can be demoralizing unless you start to embrace it for the freedom that it actually is. Number 3, increasingly self-aware. Increasingly self-aware. You know, when we're younger, our ego actually hides a lot from us. It hides a lot of the depths that we need to plunge. We talked last week about the shadow self, and that's the self that you project, but it's not your real self. And so really understanding your own faults and flaws. And I told you last week, you need to get a mirror, someone in your life to tell you the real you, the things that they see that is good about you, that God is doing in your life, and the growth edges they see that you have, the places that you could change and transform and grow, and that would be good. Another way to do this, by the way, is to think about big reactions that you have. When you notice that you have a reaction that is bigger than what the moment called for, ask yourself why that is. For instance, some of your moms, and in your household, mom, you realize that your name is constantly in the air, right? You get a couple of kids, Mom, can I do this? Mom, can I do that? Mom, can I do this? I get this a lot too. I get a 7-year-old son named William. He really likes Takis. You know what Takis are? Takis are this type of kind of like rounded chip, and it has a coating on it that I'm pretty sure will burn right through your stomach lining, and Takis will just shoot out of your belly, okay? It's really strong. He loves Takis, so he's always like, Dad, how many Takis can I have? Okay, you can have 7 Takis. Can I have 8 Takis, Dad? Yeah, you can, because I said 7, because I knew then you'd ask for 8, and I didn't want you to have 10, right? So you're just playing it, right? But you just hear your name like, Mom, 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 all the time, and normally you're cool as a cucumber and you handle it, but sometimes, an afternoon comes and someone says, hey, Mom, can I? And you're like, shut up, go to your room. What did I do? You spoke my name. And I couldn't take it anymore. Just get out of here. This big reaction, way bigger. It's like, wow, Mom, like, feels unfair to them. They're all upset. They leave. Why did you react the way that you did? Are you tired? Worn out? Are you on edge because of something that someone said to you? Something that someone did to you? An experience you had at work or with your spouse or with a family member? Like when you have these big reactions that are way bigger than the moment called for, a great way to start to understand yourself and what you need to work on is to just ask, why did I do that? Why did I do that? Anthropology is the study of human behavior. You need to become a great anthropologist of yourself. Why did I have that reaction? That's the way you start to become more self-aware of that and getting other people around you to help you with it. Non-dualistic thinking. Dualistic thinking says everything is binary, right? There's a right way and a wrong way. This group is correct and all the other groups are wrong. It's this very dualistic thinking. But as you get older, you start to realize that actually lots of things are way grayer than that, or there's not just two answers. Scripture's full of this, by the way, right? Jesus, fully God or was he fully human? Yes. Were we saved? For those of you following after Jesus, were you saved? Are you being saved or will you be saved? Yes, according to Scripture, all those things are true. We could go through a whole list of these. Do we struggle as human beings because of the sin of Adam and Eve, right? So the first people that turned their back on God, or because of our own sin? And the answer is absolutely. All these things are true. And so it's this non-dualistic way of seeing the world, and as you start climbing that second mountain, things will become a little more mysterious, a little more open, but that can be a really good thing. And then finally, this is helpful, you transcend and include. As you move from order to disorder to reorder, when you get to reorder, you're not just dismissive of everything that came before it. Right? We talked in week 1 about how helpful it is to have order, someone in your life to tell you, give you a starting place, and then how helpful it is to kick against that starting place to make sure that you believe it or don't believe it, and then now we're talking about how helpful it is to reassemble it, but you transcend those things, but you include them. So for instance, just because you understand that the world is more complex doesn't mean that you can't sometimes choose to live in a more simplified way. I'll give you an example. Let's say 2024, you're like, new year, new me, I'm gonna lose 30 pounds by May, okay? And so you get a calorie tracker on your phone and you start to log every meal. And you're like, I'm gonna eat 1,800 calories a day, 180 grams of protein, 180 grams of carbohydrates, 50 grams of fat every day. That's what I'm doing. And so you really lean into it. Now, is this the only way to eat? To count every single macronutrient that you put in your body? No. In fact, it's a bit of an insane way to eat, right? Because it's just so restrictive. And it's so reductive. You don't have to do that kind of thing. But even if you're in the reorder piece and you know that that's not necessary, it's not the only right way to do it, you might say, I need the structure of that for a time in order to achieve a goal. So sometimes you pull on order big time in order to meet a goal that you have or in order to fulfill something that would be helpful to somebody else. Similarly, someone who has wrestled with alcohol addiction, right? A lot of times they will find very helpful a First Mountain kind of church that often is protecting the order and gives them a very rigid structure. You don't go hang out with these people anymore. You don't go to these establishments anymore that serve alcohol. You are home by this time every night. These are very restrictive rules. Now, are these the best rules for everybody at all times? No, that would be a very reductive way of understanding those things. But when you have someone whose life is complete chaos, putting order, implementing order in their life can be very helpful. So you transcend and include. You see, like, there's a place for order. There's a place for disorder, for asking those questions, for sometimes, being willing to deconstruct an idea or to see that an organization, maybe like their particular strategy is not actually accomplishing their goal. What if we did this or changed this? There's a place for order, there's a place for disorder, and then there's a place for reorder. And as you move through it, you transcend what came before, but you also include it. You don't just leave it on the side. So that's like how things start to come together, a bit of how things come together. So what I want to do to kind of conclude today is to walk you through just kind of a chart that says at each stage of order, disorder, and reorder, how we think about certain things. And again, the goal of this chart is not for you to memorize it. I just wanted to try and give you some ways to think about this so that you start to understand the shape of it. So I'm hoping it's probably more of a feel to it than it is to just like, oh, here's just information for you to memorize. So life is, okay, so at each stage, life is what? At order, life is perceived often as a war or a game, right? We are right and they are wrong, and we are good and they are bad, and good must prevail. We will overcome, we will conquer, right? It's a very binary way of seeing the world. Or it's a game. Like, I will either win at life or lose at life. And you start to think like of it in terms of succeeding or failing. That's at order, right? That's the very first mountain kind of way. But at disorder, you think that life is maybe a joke or a deception. Man, all these things I was told to hustle after my whole life turns out aren't as satisfying as I thought they were. Is everyone just yanking us around by our nose all the time? Like, is anyone looking out for us? You start to think that way. There was a song that came out a number of years ago called Little Boxes, and it just talks about how everyone's going for the same things in life, and they're ultimately unfulfilling. And that's this idea. That's a disordered way of seeing it. Like, man, it's just all a deception. It's all a joke. But in reorder, you can say, actually, life is a mysterious gift. It's full of mystery, but it's full of beauty. It's full of suffering, but it's full of beauty. It's a mysterious gift. And you start to become pretty comfortable with the unknownness of life. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a little bit. Okay, so belonging. What does belonging look like? Well, at order, belonging looks like I'm part of the right true group. My group is the one that has the answers. My group is the one that's fighting the good fight. It's those other groups that are the problem. And so when you start to think about who you belong to the one true group. Now, when you're in disorder, you kind of have a suspicion for every group and structure in church and authority. And so you tend to go I am thoughtful and independent, and I am not part of a group, right? All those people are cray-cray. I, on the other hand, know what's up. And so that's kind of disorder. It can be kind of lonely. You're in it by yourself or with a few other people who are also kind of moved towards cynicism like you. At reorder, instead of being I will only be a part of a group that is the right group, or instead of saying I alone see how ridiculous the world is, at reorder, you're saying, actually, I'll work with anyone that's seeking the common good of other people. I'll work with anyone that's trying to put a little bit more of the kingdom of God in the world. It's trying to lead some other people to Jesus. And even if we disagree about a lot of things, if we can align on helping others, I'll work with them. I'll work with them. So that's kind of belonging. So then the strengths and weaknesses of each of these. Here's a strength for order. At order, you're highly committed, and you're willing to sacrifice. Why? Well, it follows, right? If you believe that I'm part of the one true group, that life is a war and we have to win it, that everything I do is part of this cause, then you'll start to sacrifice for that. You'll give your time, you'll give your money, you'll give your energy, you'll give your mental space, you'll listen to the podcast, you'll read the books, you'll teach the class, you'll do all the things because you are convinced that there is one way and this is it and I'm part of it. At disorder, you're not so sure if this is the one way. You're not so sure if there is a one way. You're kind of on the edge, checking things out, right? So the strength there is honesty, right? I'm going to be really authentic about it, really curious. You're going to bring your critical thinking to it. So here's an interesting thing. This is kind of an aside. Some churches are First Mountain churches. And this is not a criticism of those churches. First Mountain, Second Mountain, first half of life, second half of life. You can't help, and we'll talk more about this in a little bit. You can't help where you are. Okay, and everybody needs a church to belong to, I think. So First Mountain churches, because they tend to have this mindset that we're right, everybody else is wrong, or it's us against the world, or maybe it's our group of churches against the world, right? It's parsed up different way depending on the church. Convince people to rally to the cause and to give to it. And so First Mountain churches have lots of resources and money and time from their people because their people are willing to sacrifice and go for it. And then Second Mountain churches, who are full of a lot of people that have disorder in their life and they're not sure what they think and they're questioning things and they're trying to figure it out, well, those people aren't going to be willing to sacrifice a lot of time and money because they're not 100% sure that this is even the right thing. So a lot of Second Mountain churches, and here at Verve City, we're more of a Second Mountain church. So we try to create space for everybody, but certainly we have a lot of space for disorder and for reorder here. And because of that means that we have a lot of people kind of on the bubble, on the edge, which means that a lot of Second Mountain churches don't have enough resources of people giving their time or of their money, and that is where we are. We have a lot of people who, because they're not sure, and this, by the way, is not a criticism. I'm not even trying to tell you to change your behavior right now. I'm just trying to notify you of it, okay? When you're full of a lot of people who are working through disorder and reorder, which we are, and I'm grateful for, by the way, you just tend to be a little bit short on resources. And so that tends to be where we are. Now, you're surrounded this morning and every week by people who are really, really generous, but you're also surrounded this morning by people who are so unsure of where they are with faith and generosity and the way they think about things, that they're not going to give sacrificially to that with their time or their money because they're just not sure. And if that's you, I'm so glad you're here. And you don't have to do those things to be a part of this church at all. But I am naming, ironically, you may feel like, man, this is a great church that really cares for its community. And it is. Verve City is a great church that really cares for its community. We have so many people here who care so much about our community and meeting the physical needs and mental needs of our community and teaching them about the way of Jesus. We have so many people like that. And so some of you feel like, man, that is great that there's a church like this. Yes, and we could do a lot more of that if we had more resources. So I just want to name, whereas, a First Mountain church, it's easy for them to get resources. It is harder for us as a Second Mountain church to do that. And if you're the kind of person that believes in what we're trying to do here, I would love for you to consider, at some point, just thinking through, what does it look like to be more generous with my church in order for them to reach more people? And look, if you're suspicious of authorities and leadership structures, everything I'm saying right now is pinging you the wrong way. I know that, okay? Because I've been you, and you're you now. I know that. But I've said this before, I'll say it again. I do not work on commission. You give more to this church, my salary doesn't go up $1. What we can do, though, is reach more people who are in the valley, trying to determine whether they're going to stay there or try to hit up the Second Mountain or the First. And what they really need is the life-changing influence of Jesus Christ. And we want to share that with people. The more resources we have, the more people we can reach with that. And I just want to name that. It's a weakness, or it's a strength for First Mountain churches, but it's a weakness for Second Mountain churches. Finally, a reorder, a strength of reorder, is that it integrates the previous strengths with compassion, right? So once you work through these, you can go man, actually, yes, honesty, curiosity, critical thinking, but yes, high commitment, willing to sacrifice. Those are all great strengths. And we want to merge that with compassion for other people in order to reach them. That's the beauty of the reorder. All right, so weaknesses. For order, the weakness is that it tends to be combative and judgmental and narrow, right? Of course. If you've been there, or if you've known people who are, of course this is the weakness. But the weakness of disorder is that it tends to be aloof or cynical or suspicious, and then ultimately sometimes depressed, because if you believe that this is as good as the world gets and that no one can be trusted or nothing can be trusted, you can find yourself feeling some amount of despair. At reorder, you're susceptible to the previous weaknesses, right? You got to constantly be watching this, you are susceptible to these things. And I see a few of you taking pictures. This is done now. This slide is finished. If you need to take one now and you want to take it with you, you can. You are not expected to memorize this unless you want extra credit. No, there's no extra credit. So, we'll move to a second. This is the last big chart slide. At each stage, authority, the way we think about authority. Authority for those who are in order are those who know the right answer. And so usually it looks like someone who would say that they're the only way, or they know the right thing, or you want to do this thing, I can tell you exactly how to do it. And a lot of times those people at order are almost seen like a god. Wow, this person's so amazing. They know the answer. They're telling it like it is. They're they're, it's us against everybody else, and they're fighting the good fight, and they're like, and this is, so if you look at, for instance, like social media comments on First Mountain churches, a lot of times you'll find people just almost deifying the lead pastor of those churches. Whereas you look at social media comments on Second Mountain churches like ours, and what you'll find is very few comments at all. Because, because if you're like a little bit suspicious, like, well, you're just not going to jump in and be like, that's the best thing I've ever heard. It's like, you're always like, that was helpful. What else you got? It's that kind of approach, right? Like, that was helpful. Or, I don't know. You said this, and I don't know if I agree with that. And that's good. I've said this over and over again. Sermons are talks that start talks. They're the first word about something. They're not the last. I never want to be seen as the end-all, be-all. I don't want that kind of responsibility for your life, okay? But also, I just know that I have some things that I can probably teach you, but you definitely have a lot of things that you can teach me, and you do. There's a number, I see your faces looking around. There's a number of you that I have gone to lunch with, even over the last year or two, or coffee, and you have taught me so much. And I've picked your brain about stuff and asked you for your input, and you have been so helpful for me. And that's a more of a reorder kind of way of thinking about things. Like, we all have things we can learn from each other. So those who know the right answer, that's how authority is seen. In disorder, authority is seen as manipulators who control the naive. Come on, sheeple, right? It's that kind of mindset. But at reorder, you realize, like, oh, actually, the authority people, the people who are in charge, the leaders, well, they're fallible people just like you and me. They have some things that are good. They have some things that aren't. And hopefully, they're changing and transforming. So at each stage, then, what is doubt? When you doubt something, right? A lot of times, doubt is what leads you, like, that's the start of disorder for you. Doubt is failure or weakness or betrayal in order. Why? Because your doubt is a threat to the order that they're trying to protect. So if you've ever been in a church, and whether it was explicitly or implicitly stated, like, hey, we don't ask those questions here. Hey, we don't talk about that stuff here. Why? Because your question was a threat to order. And so at order, doubt becomes like a failure. It's like doubt and faith, and you feel like doubt is a threat to faith. But in fact, doubt is often the gateway to a much more robust faith. When you start asking questions, a lot of times, that's when you are starting to become alive. So doubt in disorder is a virtue to be cultivated. It says, like, oh, doubt can be really good, actually. But if you just say that doubt is good, as opposed to doubt being the catalyst that might lead you somewhere else, you can just sit in disorder for a really long time. So at reorder, doubt becomes a necessary part of life. It's a mountain portal. Like, you will not change your paradigm until it doesn't work for you anymore. So you have to first doubt it, call it into question in order to shift and change. And that's a lot of times what gets you off the first mountain and onto the second. Faith then, faith at each stage. At order, faith is an assent to a required belief. It's a means to an end. Believe this because this is the one thing you have to believe, and you'll get this reward. That's why a lot of times people still talk about Christianity in terms of just like it being a ticket to heaven. Right? It's how we've talked about things in the evangelical church in the U.S. for a long, long time. That just believe in Jesus is a ticket to heaven. Do you know for sure if you were to die tonight that you would go to heaven? It's all about heaven. Now, Jesus certainly promises heaven, an eternity with God after this life is over for those who will be reunited in relationship with him. It is a part of his message, there's no doubt. But Jesus also talks about heaven starting now, heaven on earth now. A new way of living and being and treating others and living in this lifetime. It wasn't just about a reward, it was about a whole new approach to everything, what it looked like to live a Godward life. But on order, you're really oftentimes just, it's a sense to require belief, and it's a means to an end. At disorder, faith can be an obstacle to critical thinking. You think like, oh, faith. Who has faith? Like, are you aware that science is a thing? And you start to see those things as being at odds with each other. We've talked repeatedly about how that's not true. I don't have time to get into it today. But at disorder, it can be an obstacle to critical thinking in your minds. But at reorder, it's a humble openness to the mystery of God that leads to love. That's what faith is. AC/DC had a road manager named Barry Taylor, which I assume is exactly where you thought this was going. AC/DC had a road manager named Barry Taylor. And Barry Taylor once said this. I love this quote. He says, God is the name that we give to the blanket that we put over the mystery to give it shape. God is the name we give to the blanket we put over the mystery to give it shape. In other words, God is a mystery. Jesus points us toward God, but ultimately, he's so much bigger than we can fathom that he is mysterious. Now, that doesn't mean he's unknowable. It means he is infinitely knowable. And as you learn more about Christ, you'll learn, oh, another level. another level, another level, but it's all mystery because you can't ever plumb the full depths of it. You can't ever have it all down. I was listening to a comedian a few weeks ago named Pete Holmes, and he was just talking about this Barry Taylor quote, and he said, man, God is the name of the blanket we put over the mystery to give it shape. He was like, that's such a great thing. But shouldn't I have learned that in church instead of learning that from Barry Taylor, the road manager of AC/DC? Yeah, you should have. But man, in a First Mountain church, that kind of talk is like a little uncomfortable. And so for those of us who are on the First Mountain, I realize it might be as well, but it's just an acknowledgement that like God is way bigger than we can ever comprehend. And faith, then, when you get to reorder, you are just more okay with that. Oh, there's a humble openness to the mystery of God that leads to love here. That's where this is headed. That's where this is headed. And it's okay that you'll never know all the answers to everything. It's okay. It's okay. Very quickly, as we wrap up, a couple thoughts for mountaineers. Those of you who are on the second mountain, you remember what it was like to be on the first. And sometimes you'll be having dinner with someone who's still on the first mountain, and that is not their fault. You weren't responsible for knocking yourself off the first mountain. That just happened to you. And it is only by the grace of God that you may have started climbing the second mountain. If they're on the first mountain, the only way they're coming off that sucker is if some kind of disruption happens to their life and their current paradigm doesn't work anymore. You're going to want to get them to where you are because from your vantage point, it's so beautiful. And you're like, oh, I used to be there, but I can see this now. Like, here's the problem. Because the only way they can get there is disruption. There's really nothing you can do. You cannot be the disruption for them. You can try. It will not go well. Don't try to be the disruption for them. Remember what it was like from their vantage point. Meet them where they are. Do the best you can. I love this illustration I heard from Andy Stanley one time, which is that, you're going to answer the same question in different ways depending on who's asking. So take the question, where do babies come from? This is rhetorical. Please do not stand and answer. Where do babies come from, right? If a child asks you, you answer one way. If a teenager asks you, you answer another way. If a pre-med student asks you, you answer another way, and you never lie. What do? You know this. You accommodate to their starting place. This is what life looks like for you as you're climbing that second mountain. You will meet lots of other people who are still in the first leg of their journey. Some of them will be much younger than you. That makes sense. Some of them will be your same age. Some of them will be older than you. You can't force them onto the second mountain, and you will hurt yourself, and you will hurt them, and you will make a mess if you try. Meet them where they're at. You remember what it was like to be there. And the more you are able to reorder your life, the more compassion you'll have for those who are at different places along the pathway. They're not worse than you. You're not better than them, right? That ego stuff, that's first mountain stuff. Like, that's not you anymore. Leave that ego behind. You have to develop one before you can move beyond it, but at some point, you got to recognize, like, I am here where I am today by the stuff I've walked through. The way down is the way up, and by the grace of God. So whatever I can do to be helpful to anyone else along the journey in the name of Jesus, that's what I want to do. And then finally, just a couple of thoughts for parents. Look, a lot of times, parents, as you get older, you'll start to understand, like, the world's more complex. Things are not as simple or as straightforward as you were told when you were a kid. That's because you couldn't handle it when you were a kid. But a lot of parents are like, well, I don't want to hand my kids my faith tradition in a way they can understand it because that's not fully accurate, and I want them to find their own faith. And I'm like, look, I get it. Here's the problem. You'll discover this. The perfect is often the enemy of the good. If you won't do something because it's not quite perfect, you'll oftentimes just rob them of both perfect and good. The perfect is the enemy of the good. So parents, you've got kids who are trying to work out stuff. Hand them the order that they need now. No, it won't be perfect. But they need a starting place. And you can, as they get older and you move into more of a coaching role, into more of a friend role later on as they're young adults, then you can help them see that this was actually a little bit more complex and a little bit less reductionist than what you handed them, but you accommodated your answer to the understanding of a child. Here's what I don't want you to do. Don't be so afraid of handing your kids the wrong thing that you don't hand them anything. Are you with me? Hand your kids, give them the best shot that they can get. It's at a great starting place that you can then help them walk through for the rest of their lives and keep your influence with them. That's the beauty of what you can do. So, look, I know this wasn't like 3 simple steps to reordering your life. I get that. This was a lot of information, and it was a lot of kind of like, cerebral stuff. I get that. Next week will be a lot more like boots on the ground. What does this look like? How do we do this? I hope you'll come back next week and see like what it looks like to, as you're on that second mountain, to give your life away, to start living for the sake of others and not just yourself, to pick up your cross and to follow after Jesus, and in doing so, to bless the world all around you. Right now, I'm going to invite Kenny Baker. He is our adult discipleship pastor, and he's going to come and share with you an opportunity that you might have in order to start moving from disorder to reorder if you're feeling called that particular way. So, Kenny, thanks, man.
So don't worry, it's not part 2 of the sermon. We're not going to go 15, 20 minutes. No, as we have been talking about reordering our lives around Jesus, something that might have happened is you may realize, especially at the beginning of the year, is that you have this desire to have a deeper connection with God. Or you may say, I've been walking with God for a while, but I need some people around me to walk with me. So hopefully, as we have taught through reordering our lives around Jesus, it has nudged you to want to reorient your life around Jesus, to reorder your life. And so that's happened to a couple here at our church. And so we want to share their story with you and how Rooted helped them through that.
I definitely had a lot more anxiety and fear and even grief that I had to go through.
Yeah, and just for me, like I just really struggled in believing in Jesus and just questioning his existence. My name's Jose.
My name's Yvonne.
And we've been married for 7 years now.
We have a 3-year-old daughter named Ariella. And
the first year of our marriage was great, you know. We had a lot of fun together.
After a few years, we were going through a lot of stress. And at that time, I was filled with just a lot of anxiety and didn't really know what direction to seek help in.
In our early years of marriage, I felt like I had no real relationship with God. I would actually question the existence of God.
So we heard about Rooted, and we definitely were drawn to it.
I was very hesitant. I think I told Yvonne, yeah, just sign us up. And I didn't actually think she was going to do it. And then she came back next week. She's like, hey, we started a Rooted group. I was like, what? You signed us up? And then I was like, all right, let's do it.
We definitely were anxious and a little fearful about what it was going to be like.
So we showed up to group, and there was just an amazing group of people there.
Being in a room with people that were all there to reconnect with God and people that were willing to be vulnerable and really made us feel very welcomed.
It felt like a lot of my questions started to get answered little by little. It was just nice to like share each other's stories and, you know, pray for each other. It was just very exciting just to go to group each week and just talk about the scriptures or the devotional we read that week. And our group was just amazing. It's really more of a family, really.
Mm-hmm. One of the coolest things about our Rooted journey is that we actually felt so connected with God that we felt called to actually take the plunge and go through baptism together.
Felt really called, you know, to be baptized.
It almost felt like a recommitment to our faith and to God, and it was amazing because we did it in front of our daughter, and she was there and she was excited. After the Rooted experience, I really found peace in a lot of the uncertainties that I had struggled with.
After that 10-week experience, I feel, I experience Jesus in everything that I do. And now just looking back on my life, I just really see how blessed I am and how lucky I am to have all the things that I have in my life.
Through the Rooted experience, I really learned to really trust and surrender to God, and I was able to find peace in knowing that He was going to provide the way for me.
If you're thinking about doing it, then just do it. You know, that's like the Holy Spirit right there working inside of you, like giving you those thoughts, trying to pull you in, but you're questioning it. So it's pretty much the best thing that we've done in our marriage together.
So Rooted is a 10-week small group experience. It's a great next step for you if you're trying to figure out how to have a deeper connection with God or with other people. We would encourage you, if you feel that nudge, or even if you're making excuses or you have real reasons where you say, I'm just too busy, or I don't know what to expect here, we would encourage you, follow that nudge. In order to reorient your life around Jesus, it just takes that one small step, right? To go from one mountain to the next. And so we would encourage you, talk to our team. They're across the way. You'll see the Rooted banner. They'll help you sign up. They can answer any questions you may have. We have groups for men, women, married couples, young adults, or if you have a long commute and you can't get here on Tuesday, starting this Tuesday in time, we have a Zoom option. And so, or you just don't like being around people and you just want to see them through a screen. That's okay too. We want to invite you to do this. So we would love to see you reorder your life around Jesus, and we hope that Rooted's that next step for you. I'm going to pray for us, and after service, after I pray and we dismiss, if you need a deeper prayer, we have people up front who are willing and ready to pray for you. Let's pray. God, we thank you for Jesus and his patience with us, his love for us. Thank you for his life, death, and resurrection so that we could walk in a new life. I pray that we would reorder our lives around Jesus, that you would connect to us on a deep level and connect us to others for the sake of your kingdom. God, thank you. It's in Jesus' precious and powerful name we pray. Amen. Go and be blessed.